We're going to be talking about data journalism. And so, just to give you a little bit more context, I want to talk about journalism in general, journalistic structure, a little bit of the history of journalism, and the definition of it. So, the first question is, what is journalism? And I think most folks would say, well, I know it when I see it, but let's dig into that a little bit more. So, journalism has historically been known as the fourth estate. So, this comes from the 1700s, where the other three estates were the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. But essentially, the idea of journalism is to be in the public interest and sort of serve as a balance to other parts of the world. So in the United States, we often think about journalism as another outlet, sort of as a foil to, the branches of government and the people in general. It's supposed to be kind of on the people's side. So there's kind of a classic book, The Elements of Journalism, which describes some of the tenets of journalism. And these are things like journalism's first obligation is to the truth. So it shouldn't be to some particular point of view, but about the truth. Its first loyalty is to citizens, so it's for the people. Its essence is a discipline of verification. There's kind of a journalism joke. If your mother says she loves you, you should check that out. It's important that its practitioners maintain independence from those they cover. So there can be conflicts of interest if you have a relationship with one of your sources, for example. It needs to serve as a monitor of power. So again, its loyalty is to the citizens, not to the government. It should provide a forum for public criticism and compromise. It should strive to make the significant interesting and relevant. So I think this is a really cool one. It's not just that it needs to tell the truth, but it needs to make it interesting so that people are compelled to read it and learn about the truth. It needs to present the news in a way that is comprehensive and proportional. I think we could have some conversation about what proportional means. Sometimes that means, showing both sides of a story, even if there's really only one side. I think that that's kind of a manipulation of this idea of proportional. It's okay to just show one side of the story if there really only is one. But even though you are supposed to be telling the truth, your practitioners, the journalists, have an obligation to exercise their personal conscience. So they need to be thinking about what they think is right. And then citizens have rights and responsibilities when it comes to the news. So, being a critical reader of the news, participating in the process, and then as they become producers of news and editors themselves, then you kind of get into more of these rights and responsibilities. So this is a tweet from a couple of years ago where the editor-in-chief of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School newspaper said journalism is a form of activism. And then this professional journalist wrote, sort of quoted that tweet and said journalism isn't activism. It's just presenting the facts honestly and objectively. But of course, journalists can't just tell the facts. There's no way to just tell the facts. Everyone is going to have some bias or perspective that they're coming from, and journalists in particular need to have a story that they're telling. So they need to take a perspective. There are these ideas of journalism as people, meaning journalism is what journalists do. There's journalism as institution, which means journalism is what the New York Times produces, it's what the Star Tribune produces. Journalism as practice, that kind of means that everyone can do it. If you are a person who doesn't get paid for it, but you're going out and you're doing the work, then you are producing journalism. And then there's this idea of journalism as service, so it needs to be in the public service and providing something for the citizens and speaking truth to power. Again, it's not that one of these definitions is totally right, and we could have some conversation about which one of these you find the most compelling. We've got an idea of how we might define journalism as a concept. There's also some ideas of journalistic structure. So if you were going to take an intro to journalism class or an intro to reporting class, you could spend a whole semester thinking about these sorts of things, but I just want to give you a very high level idea. So one piece of common journalistic structure is called the inverted pyramid. And it's called that because if you diagram it out, it looks like a pyramid. And the idea is you put the most newsworthy information at the very top of the article. So that's the questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Then you put in some important details, and then you put in the less important stuff as you move down to the bottom of the article. So I think that this started as a practice when there weren't digital newspapers. People really had to fit things onto a print page. And so you would send your story into your editor, and it's possible that they would just chop it off at the bottom at some point. They'd say, we don't have enough space on the page to put the whole story, so we're just gonna, cut it off. And so you want to make sure that you have the most important stuff at the top so that it doesn't get removed. And then I think this has maintained into the digital age because people have pretty short attention spans. So you want to make sure that if someone clicks on your article and they start reading, that they get the most important stuff. And then if they make it all the way down to the bottom, then they get everything else. That's usually the way that the format works. There's also a bunch of elements of articles in journalism, and some of them have kind of funny names. So you probably know what the headline is. That's like the title of the article. The byline, that's the person that wrote the article, the person that it's by. Then there's the introduction to the article, or the lead, which could be spelled L-E-A-D, or it could be spelled L-E-D-E. I usually use the L-E-D-E because it's a more unique word. The L-E-A-D looks like other types of words. And there's all kinds of different ways that you could introduce an article. So you could have a summary intro with those 5 whys. You could have a wrap intro. You could have an analysis intro. You could have a feature intro. So sometimes you'll have, introducing an individual person in the article and having a quote at the very beginning to hook you in. Then there is something called the nut graph, which could be spelled PH or with an F. That's the kind of the most important part, the nut, the core of the article. That's the so what. And then at the very end of the article, sometimes we'll call the end of it the kicker. So this is an article from last year about Google's algorithms. It's called Swinging the Vote. So this would be the headline. Sometimes there's kind of a sub-headline, like down here. This is the byline, which tells you who wrote the article. And then this would be the lead of the article. And I think this is a pretty nice lead. We've got some numbers in here, which are maybe indicating that this is going to be data journalism. But it's a little bit unclear what's going on. So it's trying to get you to follow into the article, and then it unfolds on that in the next paragraph. So, we've got these percentages for different Democratic presidential candidates. Then these aren't poll numbers. Instead, they reflect which candidates were able to consistently land in Gmail's primary inbox in a simple test. So it's got some explanation of how they did their investigation. And then, we could kind of debate which is the nut graph. I kind of think that it's down here, the nut graph, the piece that's really the story. We found that few of the emails we'd signed up to receive, 11%, made it to the primary inbox. The first one a user sees when opening Gmail, and the one the company says is for the mail you really, really want. So it's not the case that the nut graph has to be the second paragraph, but it should be pretty soon into the beginning of the article so that you really get that important stuff in your inverted pyramid. So if you stop scrolling down, you capture what the story was really about.